Can you speak towards that of your knowledge of medical uses, and also if you can get into another extremely popular is CBD, and can you talk about medical uses of THC and then also CBD and the role that plays? And I know that's kind of a whole new revolution.
Mm-hmm. Something just real briefly to sort of in a slow segue to me and this topic. Something I find very interesting in terms of cannabis isn't just how it makes you feel. It's and this is something maybe you can comment more so on, but it's the accessibility. We even had mentioned accessibility briefly in a previous conversation, but the accessibility to being able to feel better. Like, this is something that exists as a tangible element in this woman's life, that she's able to engage. She knows how it works, and generally most, assuming she was smoking it, you feel those effects relatively instantly, which means she's able to self-titrate as well and get just to that certain perfect point of feeling. And I'm not sure if you cover titration.
She told me she does not that much. She said just a little bit is all it takes.
To me, is so powerful that somebody has that ability to feel better. I mean, it's on one hand, it's unfortunately in some lights could sound like chemical dependency. And I say that as somebody who very much engages in the same type of feel and arc themselves. In another way, it feels so empowering and so healthy to simply hold the key to taking a state of mind that you're in and helping yourself feel better in a predictable, generally safe way. It's one of my favorite things about cannabis. So just, in that thought, and I'm not sure if you have any other thoughts, as this is more, I think, your field than mine, but that's, to me, is one of my favorite parts.
Yeah. And it's, and again, I know this is controversial. I get it, because some people, might say, well, you're advocating this, but the way I look at it is this, I'm kind of like libertarian, in my leanings. And I believe that, we'll get into the legality of everything, but, it's like impossible to stop its use. Okay. It's something people can grow in their backyards. Okay. So it's a weed. Okay. So, how are you going to control it? You can't. People are going to get it no matter what, and so in my view, if that being the case, that's just our reality. Why not learn more about it, be safe about it? But can things be abused? Sure. I think anything can be abusable. The same thing goes with coffee. Same thing goes with, alcohol, obviously, with a lot of things.
There's an offset there too. Every so often I'll drink maybe more coffee than I ought to, but maybe I need to be a little bit busier. And if I use cannabis almost as the opposite of coffee, that's, me cooling down the engine. Maybe I have the ability to take on a little bit more and get a little extra stressed in that day, not without, actual wellness out of mind, but with the notion that I can actually pull myself back from what might be an anxious state. Mm-hmm. It's, again, powerful.
Yeah. So tell me about CBD. What's that about? And I know, what my basic understanding is you're taking the part of the plant, or you're extracting the part that doesn't have the part that gives, not the non-psychoactive part of the plant.
It's not as selective as that. And I'm not quite sure, Doctor, if that's exactly before I,
I don't really know much about it. I'm asking.
It's the ability to extract CBD. Happens alongside the ability to extract the other cannabinoids within the plant. There are products, namely hemp, that produces little to no THC. There are products that are out there in the markets that are more or less complete CBD products. They are hemp-based products, and these CBD products don't have a very robust cannabinoid profile, but they do have CBD. And legally speaking, and from people's perception of what's safe versus not safe, CBD has a pretty good rap. With that much said, though, I would, and a lot of others in the industry would want to point out something that's oftentimes referred to as the ensemble effect. It used to be referred to as the entourage effect, sometimes still is. But the notion that there's more than, and it's a notion of the ensemble effect in terms of that description or term difference, then entourage effect is intended to take some of the attention away from who's usually the main star, which is THC. And the ensemble effect suggests that it's not even an entourage with one leader and everybody else, following as a family, that realistically there is just a whole family of cannabinoids, different ratios of them, different amounts, and so on and so forth, will help yield different effects. You could even go to the point of, and I'll zoom in on CBD in a moment, but you could even get to the point where you could suggest that there are different ailments that there are different ailments that cannabis, are very good at treating. And depending on your selection of cannabinoids and your ROA, your route of administration for these cannabinoids, be it something oral, topical, smoked, and so on and so forth, you actually have some really good ability with working cannabis in terms of means of treatment. With working cannabis as something that can actually target certain parts of the body using certain cannabinoids, which is a really cool thing, because if you consider the abilities of cannabis, there are different things you would say about THC and CBD. From a compounding pharmaceutical standpoint, you could even go as far as to say that depending on somebody's ailment, if they need more pain relief, THC, versus more of an anti-inflammatory response, which would be CBD, you could even, to that patient, from a compounding perspective, vary the amounts you'd be giving them. For somebody like me who has got a reasonable tolerance to THC, but is also aging and things hurt, a 1-to-1 ratio for somebody like me might do really good to both help me with anxieties as well as the general pains of working out and aging and things like that. You could say that somebody who's less sensitive to, you could say somebody who's more sensitive to cannabis as a whole, or to THC, diminished amounts of THC. Whereas smaller amounts of THC might be enough to create a disassociation type effect and help get them out of pain, while simultaneously helping treat them for, say, something inflammation-based, again, CBD. And we could discuss this both from the perspective of something internal, or is this something topical where we are trying to combat both something inflamed and in pain on the exterior. There's so much we can say about cannabis and CBD and what you can do with it, in fact, that there are, in my opinion, recipe books that could be written based on somebody's potential access to a smorgasbord of various cannabinoids and the ability to mix these into products, be it a tincture, topical, something to be taken internally like an edible, smokable product, vapable product. It goes on and on and on. So what can we say about this? And of course, let me know, but let me answer your question. CBD, is it a viable means of, is it a good treatment? And it can be. It's conditional. And what I'd say are there certain conditions out there that respond very favorably to CBD. I can also say that in most cases, CBD-focused treatments are much, much more effective with a certain amount of THC present. In fact, it's very, very common when talking about CBD-focused, CBD-rich products to be referring to them within a ratio, something like a 1-to-1. If you see that, odds are it's discussing a THC-CBD similarly dosed product, or a 2-to-1, which oftentimes will be twice as much CBD as THC. Epilepsy patients, for instance, oftentimes are going to be sticking to amounts closer to 20-to-1 CBD to THC.
The CBD 20 to THC 1?
Yep. So, for example, the plant itself may grow 10% CBD and 0.5% THC.
Oh. Interesting. Yeah. So that's right. So CBD comes from hemp.
No, it comes from cannabis in general, even working within what we would consider to be the regulatory structure of this state. You very often will have a plant that in the plant's makeup will be, the ability to produce both THC and CBD. In that ratio that I mentioned, sometimes is associated with a strain, and that strain is known to produce a certain ratio of CBD and THC. You can say that hemp, as you mentioned, generally speaking, has extremely low amounts of THC. However, the notion of CBD only coming from hemp isn't accurate. CBD could come from any cannabis, and what we consider to be very, very low THC, easy to trade across state or national borders style hemp is the plant itself. Its makeup, its genetics are quite a bit different. That's a low THC producing genetic versus oftentimes what I see working in a laboratory, BelCosta Labs, versus what I tend to see is oftentimes high THC. And if there's CBD, it's usually expressed through that ratio. It's a CBD THC product. So
it's not the case that CBD is a therapeutic part and the THC isn't, so because they each have their own specific therapeutic.
You would suggest that the dynamic between the two of them is much more significant than isolating each chemical as what it would do. For instance, THC is seen as a psychoactive inebriating chemical. CBD is seen as often anti-psychoactive and something that'll actually straighten out a psychoactive response. So what you end up having is, with a THC CBD combined product, a diminished high, which is an actual function of the product. It's not meant to get you high while still giving you the benefits of consuming cannabis.
Legality. So the legality of the product. I know it's like certain states, yes. I mean, I know the federal government still has a Schedule 1. I'm not sure if that's going to ever change. It's very slow. Things are slow to change.
Yeah, we'll see.
But I know certain states, But like I said, I mean, I'm not advocating the use. I just wanted people to understand that I'm not saying. I wanted Nate to come in because I just wanted to learn more about this, and I have seen, and like I said, with certain patients, definitely some therapeutic benefits. But like I said, I think it's very difficult when you make something illegal, like they used, like the prohibition back when with alcohol. It doesn't work. When you try to make something illegal, people will get it. If you don't get it from a reputable shop, you're going to get it from your local dealer. And so there, it's almost like what in my libertarian brain, what's the point of making it illegal? Because it's really useless. So what can you say about what's going on in a legal sense?
I've been in the industry for about 25 years. I've seen it change many different forms in that sense. Legally speaking, I have maybe a different perspective, and it probably has to do with, that I'm just at that age where, I'm in mid-40s at this point. So late teens is when I figured out cannabis was awesome, and have worked in it for the most part professionally since then. I've seen difficulty in those first difficulty and setbacks in those first 0 through 18 years or so, enough so that the last 5 to 7 years, let's say 7 years or so of the industry, have been almost shocking in its degree of development and acceptance. Something flipped the switch right around 2016 through 2018, where it went from demonized to, hey, how can I get into that? I, of course, was a part of it, and fortunately for me, I always think that, ironies in the world are something worth stating, just because, how did that happen? And me engaging in something long before it was nearly as accepted and legal is part of the same idea of why I'm good at it. And the fact that I have a career right now is because I engaged in something illegal for so long and got good at it. You know what I mean? And by the time that everything actually turned around and became accepted, go figure, I went from somebody who was climbing, up a mountain with no end in sight to apparently close to the top of it. And it's like, how the hell did I get here?
That 16 to 18, I wonder if that had anything to do with deregulation at the time, maybe, or?
It very much was leading up to that point for years and years. And what you ended up seeing is what you ended up seeing was generally people looking at this as a means to be able to make money, and you saw more investment in it and people willing to invest in it than ever before. It's not to say there was a lack of investment in the previous years, but it seemed to mostly be cannabis people who were reinvesting in it. There's a lot of fresh people with fresh, money and ideas and everything else they wanted to project at this new, and they're then beginning to burgeon industry, and this was some of the effects. I think since then the spell has worn off, and although cannabis is still headed in the same, going to be legal someday soon type trajectory that set it on, I do think that legality-wise, from the perspective of the last 4 years, and I know it's not a perfect example of what happens if you get pulled over with cannabis in X state. I mean, if you're in Idaho, you're probably still pretty screwed, right? Mm-hmm. But if you were to look at things how they were 10 years ago versus now, it's night and day. 10 years ago, demonized, one would have to not only justify themselves to landlords and banks, but to their own family, whereas I am now, businesses have wide open arms oftentimes in trying to work with cannabis, often because too there's extra financial incentives that a lot of these companies see in trying to work with cannabis. Whether or not the cannabis guys have the money is a different statement, but the idea of it being wide open arms at this point and something that's generally accepted. I just traveled the United States, and I was not a stranger then either of what I do when I ran into strangers. And for the most part, everybody loves it. Nobody's really seen something against cannabis, which I'm not going to lie, when I was in my late teens, and I had some weed on me, it felt like I was, just a few steps away from getting a ticket and having to show up in court. So it's very, very different in terms of how it's felt. And it's partially because I've been at it for so long, and I'm seeing what looks like an arc that's going perfectly towards legalization, and me being who I'm allowed to be, me being able to exercise who I am. Personally, I like the idea of cannabis tourism. I like the idea of it being acceptable for that whole industry to really rise. And I like the idea of, from a selfish perspective, me going and visiting certain parts of this earth that I would love to see and being high while I do it.
Share with us again in closing. Do you have anything else to add? Or
so much more to add, Doctor. We should do this again.
I might have you back.
I am happy to add as much as I can. There are so many things to consider about this awesome plant, and the fact that it's ingrained into our history, according to some. It is even our ability to consume cannabis and see the down regulation of cannabinoid receptors in the body is considered to be a survival trait. And if that's right, that means it's literally written into us, encoded into us, the ability to take cannabis, consume cannabis, and it not impact our ability to survive. And it's a hell of a plan. I feel very, very lucky that I came in at the right point of history to be able to study and work with it. So
tell the audience again the name of your lab.
My name is Nate Winnakur. I'm one of the founders and vice president of BelCosta Labs, which is a cannabis... BelCosta, they're right there. BelCosta Labs.
Okay.
Which is a cannabis testing lab. The cannabis testing lab perspective, having done that for well over a dozen years, almost 15 years, has given me an amazing view at cannabis, not just how the plant works chemically and to some slight degrees and working with some patients out there physiologically, but also in terms of the appreciation for just how much it does. And I mean, it's ultimately given me a life and a career and helped make people around me healthier and better. So I wouldn't have it any other way. I also am starting up another project. I am one of the, as near as I can tell, leading cannabis educators out there. And I'm starting up an online project called Teaching Bud. And it should be pretty easy to
Teaching
find.
bud. I like the
Yeah,
I like
teaching bud.
I love that.
So that's what I do, and hopefully my future is full of opportunities to share and educate on the plant and all of that good stuff.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it, and I might have to come back again because we could keep talking about this probably for a while longer.
Yeah. Let me know what you guys think. I'm really stoked to have been here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for
Thank you,
coming
Doctor.
in.
Yeah. So I did have a couple of questions from around the room with regards to cannabis and how it works. One of the questions, the first one was indica versus sativa, and more specifically, how indicas affect some people, how sativas affect some people, to that degree, right?
Right.
So where we're at with that. Sativa and indica, technically mainly morphological traits in the plant. They describe how it grows. Now, I say that because although sativa is associated with waking you up and indica is associated with putting you down, putting you to sleep, there is a lot more nuance and complexity to those besides that. It's not like trucker pills where one wakes you up and the other one puts you down. In this sense, there's a lot more to it than that. There are plants that grow like sativas that feel like indicas. There are versions of sativa that may have you feeling energetic and like you almost can't sit still, virtually caffeine and cannabis form. Whilst there are other types of sativa, or what you consider to be sativa, that may just kind of be comfortable while you're active and might sort of just taste good. And it's just something that helped put you in a happy mood as you go forward. And it was just a small part of a larger experience. At the same time, indica isn't necessarily something that's referring to something that'll put you to sleep. There's vastly different strains and that fall into the indica category, and even chemical variations within those strains. Some of them really do put you to sleep and don't have too much character to them. They're, essentially very just sleepy types of herb. Other types are very chilling and calming, which won't necessarily put you to sleep, but give you the opportunity to still carry through maybe a more anxiety-ridden part of your day. On top of that, you have formulated products that may even be meeting descriptions of both of these. And in a lot of cases, even some of your favorite herbs might fall into that hybrid category where you really do get a mixed bag of various feelings. It's neither something that wakes you up or puts you to sleep. In some cases, it's just fun and it's an enjoyable high. In that sense, I would say that everybody's a little bit different. And generally speaking, what you end up getting with something unique, and this is where I find some of the more interesting sides, but often what they'll refer to as exotic strains, or ones that are a little bit more unique, have a different chemical profile than what you're used to taking. Often those will be the ones that are most profound and different. Even if you are smoking high THC cannabis all the time, having access to an exotic strain or consuming an exotic strain, even if it's lower THC, may absolutely knock your socks off and give you a type of high that you might have been chasing for years, trying to find something that was simultaneously fun, yet sedative, yet had qualities to it where the high seemed to change at certain points. These can be features of cannabis, and when you see people expressing that they enjoy it and are having fun with it, sometimes it's multiple aspects. Hell, sometimes I'll start with an appetizer and end with dinner, and sometimes I'll start with a sativa and end with an indica. It's just, it falls into those, just kind of different and respective categories in terms of something I might have some fun and keeps me awake versus something I might smoke at the end of the night and go to sleep. And you had a couple of questions.
I was just wondering if you could give some specific combinations for symptoms that I think most older adults are dealing with, such as sleep, anxiety, more energy, and pain, specifically pain.
So can I suggest some solutions that may come from cannabis that will That may apply to individuals that don't have maybe a crazy high tolerance to cannabis or are super familiar with it. That provides relief from anxiety and pain, stuff like that, right?
Correct.
Cool. Yeah, there's a lot that you can say, and there are a lot of different products that might meet these conditions. In my opinion, some of the most common introductory products to cannabis are going to be topicals. So if we're talking about somebody being in pain, a topical product might be a really good way of looking at or being introduced to cannabis.
You mean rubbing it right into the area, you mean?
Yeah, just a topical external treatment into the skin rendered by cannabis. So a good example would be a pain cream. And pain could come in a couple of different forms. I've mentioned pain relief through THC and anti-inflammation through CBD, which is a bit more complex than that. But if you were looking at products, say in a dispensary that were formulated, and you found equal parts THC and CBD, you would, in my opinion, correctly surmise that the active ingredients are putting equal amounts of importance to pain reduction and to anti-inflammation. In this sense, let's say if the pain is something external, let's say it's knee pain, wrist pain, anything arthritically related, any of that, you could suggest there being a version of external treatment that exists in cannabis. If it's more on the pain level and less in the inflammation level, something higher in THC may be appropriate. If it's the opposite, something that's high that requires anti-inflammation and anti-inflammation treatment, something that's high in a version of THC called THCA. Or THCA and CBD combined. These products exist and would be something that you'd consider to be much more related to an anti-inflammation type treatment. Pain can come from inflammation as well. So there are layers of description I could give to this, to where you might be attacking a problem that essentially exists in a compound way, and you can do that through a combination of chemicals. With the opportunity to look at other versions of cannabis, again, I have, in my opinion, the two closest ways to introduce cannabis in a comfortable way are through vape pens. I prefer, ones that are much more of a single source, high end, sometimes a bit pricier too in that sense. But vape pens, namely because you can titrate, which means you can take just enough medicine. Well, you can self-titrate, which means you can take just enough to where you're feeling good, and you can do so through a pretty specific, even easy to measure way. And that, to me, is a really good way to be introduced to cannabis as well, because it is something much closer to what I would consider to be a medical delivery type of approach. In that sense, I would consider something that you may inhale, or something in terms of an edible that you might eat, to be something of an internal approach, whereas something topical would be an external approach. For what you're asking for, I would suggest both. If we're talking about pain, let's say it's something you can feel externally, I'd like to deal with it externally. For something like anxiety, probably, unless, part of your body is hurting so bad that that's what's causing the anxiety, it's probably accurate to say that there is a combination you should go for outside of maybe just looking at topical, or even something that's usually perceived as safer, like just looking at CBD. What I would recommend is low dosage and working with generally non-psychoactive or less inebriating versions of cannabis. Things not necessarily devoid of THC, but CBD rich, and high amounts of CBD alongside THC would be the kind of products that I'd recommend trying out. Small metered amounts and going from there. High THC products are great for pain as well, especially edibles, but that's a slippery slope. There are plenty of people and plenty of stories out there of people who took high THC product and thought they were losing their mind. Odds are they're going to be okay, but in the moment, it probably seemed like the scariest thing ever. I would want to help somebody avoid that. And what I would tell them if it was their first time trying something, whether it be cannabis or alcohol, I'm not going to pour them a party bowl size shot. I'm going to give them just a little taster. And I would recommend anybody either smoking for the first time or taking edibles for the first time to try that taster, establish where a level of comfort is, and go from there. The idea of titration, although in a much more traditional sense, where the idea of titration might exist in a format where, please correct me if I'm wrong, doctor, but where you maybe take a certain amount as your dosage for week 1 and then take an additional amount as your dosage for week 2, week 3, even more, and so on and so forth until you reach that comfortable level that you're also comfortable with. You can say that that can exist in a fairly structured format if you're attempting cannabis edibles. You can also buy a little bit more ability to handle it by taking it right before you go to bed. I can assure you that if you are taking an appropriate amount, you'll sleep amazingly, and unbroken sleep and being able to rest through injury is arguably some of the best way to be able to take cannabis as a means of therapy and feeling better.
Can you speak to what you would recommend for energy? As I get older, my energy is getting a bit depleted.
Can I speak to what you could do about waning energy? Agreed. And did you have something too, doctor?
Well, I just thought what you were just talking about. I think one risk I've seen is psychosis. If the person has bipolar disease or disorder, or especially bipolar 1, that there's some risk of psychosis. And the question would be, like, let's say with a younger person who gets psychotic, is the person possibly bipolar already, just kind of uncovering that mania, or could it be causing? I'm not sure. I buy this because I think the bipolar disorder is genetic, and but that is, I think, one potential risk is the potential psychosis. And
that makes sense. And I think there are conditions that can lead to that. I remember there's been numerous studies done over the years, especially considering a fairly high rate of people who have schizophrenia who also consume cannabis. And I remember at first it was a one begets the other kind of notion. But as it was looked into more and more studies were uncovered, it looked like simply that, for something like schizophrenia, which can come, potentially be triggered by so many different things and so many versions of imbalance that can ultimately lead to this, and so many different chemical cocktails that can be used to try to treat it with various levels of effectiveness. And then this sort of conditional, but also pretty broadside of a barn-esque type of treatment, which is cannabis. And you're seeing now a very, very, I would say unnaturally large, but it actually is the opposite. It's naturally and logically large number of people who oftentimes are self-medicating because that's one of the best treatments available to them. And I do think you're right. It can absolutely trigger psychosis. At the same time, something that's associated with being a psychoactive chemical, THC, right? It doesn't make me strip off my clothes and run through the streets, right? Like, I actually could be happy or relaxed on it, which is for a psychoactive chemical and something that could have been associated as something psychoactive. Literally, the response it has on me and my wife and so many others is anti-psycho.
Right.
So that's
right, exactly.
It's so interesting. I mean, honestly, it's I think maybe the perfect realm of like how nobody knows, but somehow perfectly skirts the line between my professional, my career choice and yours. So really interesting stuff when you consider that. To your question, energy. What can you do with cannabis and the notion of as energy wanes? That was a question for me too, as I'm hitting that point in my life where I'm seeing all of these physiological changes, and what can I do? And some of the answers are more obvious than not. Go out, work out, hit the gym stuff. Other things are, what can you do that's healthy for you, and what areas can cannabis still have a part in this. I found that being able to get a full night's sleep just from cannabis edibles, and even being able to, after a stressful day and on the kind of day where I'll be staring at the ceiling for a couple of hours before I go to bed, smoking an appropriate amount before I go down does wonders for how I feel, just for my state of mind, for my mental health, for my energy and ability to cope with things on the following day. Night and day, more profound or powerful than virtually any drug I've ever taken is the effects that a night's sleep has on my body, right? Mm-hmm. In that sense, cannabis has been an amazing sleep aid, and when we're appropriately controlled, you won't really be feeling the next day. That would be, I think, to give you the best answer to that question, I think that's it. Others might suggest that something like a sativa type of product, one of the more energetic varietals of cannabis, would be a good way to go, and they wouldn't be wrong. It might not give you that crazy spurt of energy. It's certainly not going to be a second caffeine or something like that for you, but it does give you elements of an experience that aren't necessarily pulling you down, that can be seen as something that actually keep you going. Example, let's say you have an artistic aspect to your day or something you'd like to do. Cannabis will generally, the right strain that's not making you sleepier, if it is something that is generally energy or creativity inducing, which is not rare in the world of cannabis, you might actually find, again, I keep talking about experiences, and you might find a more robust experience in having smoked a little bit and done that. And to help create an example of how that exists, you know how there's like plenty of alcohol plus painting type of classes that are out there. Mm-hmm. There are, from what I can tell out there, just as many almost, depending on where you go, of get high and go paint, at mm-hmm. the same kind of session. And again, it's one makes people relaxed and more creative, and the other one makes, people relaxed and more creative. So that's how that would kind of look.
I hope you enjoyed the show today. If you have issues with mental health, or if you know someone who needs help, I'm available. If you want to contact my office, my website is drpaulcoronamd.com. That's DR for doctor. And you can also learn more about me on my website. My phone number, if you want to contact my office directly, is 949-481-0118. If you want to learn more about my methods and what I do, my latest book, I recommend The Corona Protocol, a scientifically proven medical solution to stop addiction, bullying, homelessness, school shootings, and suicide, 30 years in the making. In this book, I tell 30 original short stories about people. And I also have my first 3 books, Healing the Mind and Body, the trilogy, available online. I look forward to you joining me again on the next episode of the Dr. Paul Show.